Welcome back to this final part of Murder with Friends. Today we're discussing Michael Swango, and where you're picking up with us, we are going to be talking about the investigative measures and science that was used to convict Swango and tie him to all the killings. And then we're going to be talking about the psychology of people who poison for murder. Before we get into that, I just want to kick off the segment with a story that your brother brought up, Andrew. Love you, Andrew. Basically talking about how the people of Quincy were able to build a case against him for poison. It has to do with iced tea. So Andrew, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, there was one day there were two employees, co-workers of his, that made a pitcher of iced tea, poured themselves some glasses, had to run out on a call. So they leave their glasses with their names on them, put them in the fridge. And when they come back, they taste them and taste very obviously off. And this was after the fact that Swango was already under suspicion of poisoning donuts and the coffee. And so they took it to a university professor and he measured it and it was found to have metallic elements within the tea.
And as I understand, that was basically the key evidence that was able to convict him and tie him to that poisoning.
Yeah, arsenic.
And I think that sort of sets a tone for what we would see later in life when he's locked up at this point for fraud. But investigators know that the time is really ticking.
Yeah.
Because I think he was only sentenced for like 2 years. He was only going to be doing 2 years behind bars for fraud because that's not. I mean, it's a serious crime. I don't want to feel like it's not a serious crime. It's a serious crime and you should not commit fraud, but it's not, a lifetime imprisonment. So they really had the clock working against them. Let's go to a video element right now, just sort of explaining some of the speedy, innovative science that had to be discovered and put in place to convict Michael Swango.
Swango was as cunning as he was twisted. He poisoned many of his victims using chemical compounds that were untraceable, or so he thought. Following his arrest for fraud, the National Medical Services were commissioned to develop a test and analysis method to identify Swango's poisons of choice. Bodies of suspected victims were exhumed so tissue specimens could be collected. Researchers discovered the muscle relaxant succinylcholine and the heart stimulant epinephrine. These compounds are commonly used in hospital settings. Forensic toxicologist Frederick Reiters said of the discovery, quote, "This should serve as a warning and a deterrent to those who would commit a crime using these and other previously undetectable compounds. You cannot outsmart present-day science," end quote.
This is kind of a crazy turn of events because they made this discovery, I think it was like days before he was going to be released for fraud. They were able to build this case. It's incredibly impressive. A lot of times I feel frustrated with how slow the
justice system is?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was pleasantly surprised in this case, although and we're gonna get into this in this segment as well, there were many failures that allowed him to even get to that point. Different mechanisms in place that were allowing him to move between hospitals despite leaving this very suspicious and deadly trail behind. At least when it really counted, they were able to put these measures in place to make sure that he could be tied to these crimes, and that worked out for him. One thing that I want to get into that was a little bit murky, so I wonder what your interpretation would be on this, was his motive. There were some things that were read out at his trial from his notebook about musings that he had, things that were a little suspicious, definitely a sort of twisted God complex and the power that he felt, but that might have just been through medicine, maybe it was through murder. What have you found about his motive? What do you think it was?
I truly just think he was fascinated with death. And also you said, he kind of has a God complex about him, like having that power, the power to take a life. I think he probably just like really got off on it. I think he was just obsessed with death. Like,
also remember the sexual perversion that was sort of mentioned by coworkers.
There were a lot of like creepy things that he said to his coworkers too, like about two of his coworkers were dating, and he said something about like the woman about how he'd love to like smash the
fantasy.
Sexual fantasy about like smashing her head in with a fucking axe or something. So he would say things like that.
That's so
openly.
Something about like all the stories and the violent death they thought had like a sexual undercurrent, and like one quote was like, "I can't wait to go tell these parents that their kid is dead with a heart on." Like just the most awful, despicable.
It's warped it's awful, it's twisted, but what strikes me about Swango as well was that he was very non-violent in how he killed people across the board.
Yeah.
He was using poison in times when he, if he was slowly poisoning his wife, which indeed it appears that he absolutely was, he never.
That's a slow burn.
That's a slow burn. Like, even though he did have these violent fantasies, and you would see this about the things that he would put in a scrapbook, the things that he would write about, the books that he liked to read were incredibly violent. He never actually put that in practice into his own life. This is a quote that I found from Psychology Today that I want to get your reaction on about people who poison for murder. People who poison for fun, for murder. People who murder with poison is a better way of saying that. Given that 1 out of 5 verified murders by poisoning is never solved, it's hard to draw a definitive psychological profile of the typical poisoner. Those who've been caught and convicted give us some clues. Clever, sneaky, emotionally immature, methodical, and self-centered. Many of them are amazingly skilled at pretending to be something they're not: a doting husband, caring nurse, devoted friend. Behind the mask, though, lies a psyche that is propelled by childish needs and unencumbered by moral restraints. Now, reading that or hearing that, do you think that fits the bill from what we know of Michael Swango?
Absolutely. I think that was, put really well.
It's interesting. I hadn't really considered him to be emotionally immature, but then when you hear stories about how he interacted with people and his oversharing.
Emotionally immature and also extremely egotistical, that he thinks I can say this to anyone and no one's gonna suspect anything, or like I'm fine. Like, he's so arrogant.
And I think his arrogance also plays into his lack of understanding of the consequences for his actions. Something that comes to mind is at his initial trial in Quincy, which I think we can all agree that Quincy was like the baddest town alive when it comes to this case, because they really did their due diligence in adjudicating him for what they could and putting him on trial for what they could tie him to, and the whole community really comes together. Something that Swango doesn't understand at this trial in Quincy is that he was calling his fellow paramedics to testify on his behalf as sort of character witnesses. And his defense attorney had to say, they don't want to work with you, man. Like, they do not want to testify on your behalf. They hate you. You poisoned them.
That's how arrogant he is. He's like, they'll testify for me.
They like me. I'm a cool guy. We had donuts together. Like, they obviously, I brought
donuts. They had them around me. I brought them. They had donuts.
Like they obviously love me. And you just see that he doesn't understand that. And he is sort of, his moral compass is unencumbered. It's all totally self-centered about what he wants to do and how he can get away with it. And I mean, a minor thing is just like the identity theft and the fraudulent papers that he would forge. That's a little thing where you're not considering other people's lives. And of course, murder as well. Like, you're not considering the lives of others. Another thing I think we have to talk about, and I don't know if we can solve this, I don't know how we do this, but I get so frustrated when I hear about how this guy was able to move from hospital to hospital. What happened here? Like, was it just like, we don't want to deal with this, we don't want to have any responsibility, so just don't work here anymore and we're not going to tell anybody?
I think that, like, the hospitals didn't want to be held liable, you know? Like, I think that that's why they were just, kind of like what you said, just like, shh, just go, Like, I think that there was probably a lot of cover up from people high up at these, like, especially OSU. That's the one that stands out to me the most. Like, so many bad things happened there. The fact that he could just go from that unscathed, that's crazy.
There's one account at OSU where a woman, and I think it might be the one that you brought up, but I saw a French documentary about him. So this is what they said from that account, was that after he left her room, she was actually able to draw on a board and say that the doctor injected her with something. And then was when she had this response to whatever medication she was on.
Like
she was able to say that. Sorry?
I think it was like paralysis, that he gave her something. And then right when it happened, like, her arm went numb, and then just like paralysis was done. And then afterward, was able to like point him out and say, that's the guy.
And this happened, and this happened at OSU.
She was accused of paranoia as well.
It is really crazy how this played out. It's incredibly frustrating. You sort of read through the case, and I felt like screaming like in a horror movie, like, oh my gosh, like, somebody do something. I told you before we went to tape that I read this blog post or an opinion piece on the Swango case, and this person felt very strongly that the people who were enabling him to move forward unencumbered, and we're able to, for him to be able to move from hospital to hospital, which he didn't move to as many hospitals as Charles Cullen, but he was able to move around pretty freely and shockingly easily, that those individuals should be held to the same criminal standard of accountability that he was held to. Now remember, he is currently serving 3 life terms in Colorado without the possibility of parole. What do you make of that assertion that someone made?
That's a tough one, because I don't know exactly who or how many people are in charge of or are responsible for letting him slide and move around so much. The families of victims, they should have to pay that. They should have to compensate them 100%. Definitely. Yeah. But as for punishment, I don't know.
I also sometimes wonder about when this all played out. And this is such a sort of millennial musing, but I'm like, well, the internet really wasn't as prevalent, and I wonder if he would have been able to have gotten away with it. Like what would it have taken for one of the nurses at one of these hospitals to just go rogue on Facebook and make a huge status and go viral that she had suspicions for the following reasons?
Or a family member of a patient who had, I think there's no way he would have been able to do it for as long. With social media, something would have happened.
And then also when he's fleeing to Zimbabwe, and remember that was really him at the end of his rope. I mean, and even going to Saudi Arabia as well, just trying to get anywhere out of being recognized. Well, the internet would have been there. It just makes me sort of wonder if he would have gotten away with it. Unfortunately, that's an answer that we won't know. And he was able to take so many lives. And it is really tragic, but something that I want to take away from this, and a silver lining that I like to find whenever we talk about these cases, is I think the community of Quincy, where you guys are from, just came together in a way that is so cool and badass, and it's a traumatic thing that they went through. And a news piece that I saw from Quincy was saying that this is something that the people of Quincy don't really like to talk about, but I know it is sort of a stain, but it was handled with such tenacity by the community for what they could tie him to. That's my takeaway, is your hometown's awesome. Your hometown did what they could. All right, well, that's gonna do it for our discussion on Michael Swango today. I'm really curious to hear from you guys though in the comment section below. Had you heard of Michael Swango before? Swango, Swango, Anacron, Crane, we wanna hear. How do you pronounce it? Countess Cron. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more Murder with Friends, and we'll see you next time.